and questions. And so we have a process for that that we'll tell you about. And then Karen is going to wrap up the evening. She's been out and about all day today working with our teachers. And so she wants to share a little bit about what she's seeing in the classroom and what those instructional strategies that our teachers are using, what they're looking like, and what the student product and outcomes are of that. So Jen is going to give us our updates.
Welcome, and thank you guys for being here tonight. So first and foremost, for some logistics, we just want to kind of go over our dates and schedule for the rest of the year. It's no secret that we've had a somewhat interrupted start to the school year, and so a lot of our meetings and a lot of our parent nights have been shifted and moved around a little bit. So we just wanted to make sure that we have a public notice of the dates for the remainder of the year. Our leadership team meetings we had our first one October 25th. Thank you for those of you who had participated in that. Our next one is November 14th, followed by January 16th and March 13th. Our GATE Identification Informational Parent Meeting, which is the meeting to inform our third graders who will be taking the assessments this year, will be on December 11th, 2017, right before we head off onto a little break. And then we have another GATE parent meeting at the end of the year, March 26th, and that will be a time for our current and new to the program families to come out and hear some information about how our year went and kind of how we're wrapping up the year and what our goals are for the year to come.
Are there times set for those meetings yet?
That's a great question. Our leadership meetings begin at 4 to 6. I believe both of the other parent nights are the same time as this, so 6:30 to 7:30. Okay. All right. Our GATE leadership team is comprised of parents, administrators, and staff from the schools, including our board members as well. Typically, we have a 2-year rotation on this team because we want to make sure that we include the voices of as many of our schools and team members as possible. So as you can see, we have our parent representation on the left-hand column, our NUSD staff representatives on the right-hand column, and this year our Board of Trustee representative, who is here with us tonight, is Gregory Mack. And basically this team is a representation of all of our different types of programs at each of the different levels, and then also teachers, coaches, and administrators from within NUSD. Our goal is to have at least one representative from each of our cluster, 4th grade, cluster 5th grade, and then self-contained 4th grade, self-contained 5th grade, so that we have equal representation from throughout the district. Absolutely. We'd also like to take a moment to introduce Yvonne Chaidez. He's in the back over here. And he is our Assistant Superintendent of Education Services. And so I just wanted to let you know that he's here, and if you wanted to say hello.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I was able to present to our leadership team last meeting that they had. And glad Greg is out here, our Board of Trustee. And just want to thank the team for the great work you're doing, and just wish Jen a happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. All right. So last year, our GATE leadership team spent a great deal of time both at looking at how we are gaining information from our parents and our students on the value and equity of our program. The second piece was really to create and mold the vision statement for mission and vision statement for our program. This year, we're really continuing to track student progress. And as you can see up there, we really have 3 quantitative ways in which we are looking at our students and how they're growing through the years. We look at CASP, but that is an annual assessment. As we know, it's important for us to look at more formative assessments through the year, so we have a little bit more information, but also a multiple measure or markers throughout the year to let us know where our students are going. And for those, we use MAP and MARS assessments. MAP assessments are given for language arts and math. MARS assessments are just math. For qualitative information, we look at the student surveys and the parent surveys. Those happen typically 2 times a year. And again, our leadership team will come together this year to revise what was handed out last year and make sure that there's no changes we want to make or update as needed. And then our goals are always to improve communication between our schools, our students, and our community. Make sure that we have an equity of programs between not only our different school sites, ensuring that no matter which program our students are attending, that they are receiving an equitable experience. We want to make sure that our students are receiving the services that they have, that they require, regardless of where they are and which classroom they're in. In addition, we look at the equity of our identification process. And Michelle's going to talk to you a little bit about the identification process in a moment. And of course, student success, that goes back up to that quantitative and qualitative assessment that we look at and use to look at our students' growth over time. All right, Michelle's going to tell you about identification this year.
So we have a couple of changes that are happening this year. We have a new communication system that we are trying out this year, and it is auto-fed from Aries. So what that means is when we send out emails, we have the most accurate parent email addresses. And so we're hoping to streamline our communication. So when we're sending out those gate screening letters, which are telling parents about the dates and the times and what the gate testing looks like, that is all going to be sent via email through this new system. And what we're hoping is that this will increase the accuracy and also the timeliness of parent communication. If someone has opted out of email, then we will send a hard copy home. So that's one change that will be happening. This year, that communication will be sent in November. So it's a little bit earlier this year. We're hoping to get it out before that Thanksgiving break. The gate identification parent night, as Jen mentioned earlier, will be happening in December, on December 11th, where parents can hopefully ask those questions that they have about the identification procedure after they get the first information letter. Our gate screening window will be extended. So we will have it span rather than just 1 month. In January, it will start in December and it will run all the way through January. And the reason that we want to extend that testing window is as a district, we're really trying to reduce student anxiety around testing. And that's all testing and all assessments that we give. And by opening up that testing window, what we're doing is we're allowing a little bit of wiggle room so that the assessments can be woven into existing assessments that the students are already taking, like MAP and MARS. So it doesn't stand out as a separate testing event to sort of bring that anxiety down for our students. It also allows our site testing coordinators a little bit more wiggle room to spread out the testing experience for the different grade levels and the classes that they have to test. And it also allows parents, if a child is absent, it's easier to do makeup testing. So that we're excited about extending the testing dates. Our student identification and the student study team will be meeting in mid-February to review all the data pieces that we pull together for the screening, and they will be making their determination. Parent notification will be sent home in early March, and then the gate parent tours will happen shortly after that. Once all the gate parent tours have been completed, then parents will be asked to turn in their choices of where they would like their gate student placement. Are there any questions about the new identification procedures before I go on? Yes.
Just assuming that you have a process for parents that don't have email, and there are those that opt out and they can act, but there's a lot of parents that don't.
Yes. So the process, the question was, do we have a process for parents who don't have emails? And yes, so what we would like to do is we'll be sending home hard copies. I think it's less than 10%. Probably more around 6 or 7% of parents that don't have emails listed, and we'll be sending those hard copies directly to their address. We will also have hard copies of everything available at sites for parents to pick up as well. Yeah. Yes.
So, I just had a question. If I remember right, there's a writing component or a writing prompt.
Yes.
Will that happen in that window as well then?
So those are embedded into our curriculum. So we actually have 2 writing pieces. We have the fall trimester writing piece, and then we have the winter writing piece that is coming up. So we actually will have 2 of the on-demand writing prompts that we can pull from. Yes, and that's a great question. The question was, those writing pieces that we use as data samples, will they be integrated into this? And yes, they are part of the embedded curriculum that our students are already experiencing. The other part that's embedded are the MARS tasks. So every student takes 2 MARS tasks in the fall, and then 2 more in the winter and 2 more in the spring. So we'll have a total of 4 MARS tasks to choose from as well. That's also been a big district initiative, is to get those common assessment pieces unified across the district, which we've been working on. So we're able to pull those a little bit easier now. Any other questions before I? Yes.
Is still going to be the COGAT that you use, and then also can you speak a little bit about opting out?
Mm-hmm. The question was, are we still using the COGAT as our screening method, and to share a little bit more about the opt-out process. So yes, we are still using the COGAT online 7 assessment. That has not changed. That is the best test when we look at other districts and see what other sites are using. And that is the highest rated as far as having the least amount of bias in it. Opting out is available for parents who wish it, and that will be included in the letters that we send home, the process for how to go about doing that. And parents will be automatically opted in because it's just yet another district assessment. It's nothing special. It's not an IQ test. So if a parent chooses to not have their child take the test, they just have to fill out the form asking to be excused and send that in to me at the district office. So it's that part of it is the same process as last year. Yes. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. And one of the questions that came up recently at our GATE leadership team meeting, and it's also a question that Jen and I heard quite frequently when we were out on the GATE parent tours at both the self-contained site at Linwood and also the different cluster classrooms, was what is the main difference between a cluster model and a self-contained model? Parents were very curious what the basic difference was. And I think the reason that this question keeps coming up is because there may be a misconception that there is a big disparity between the programs, and so people want to know. But the reality is that the 2 programs are actually very similar. And if you walk into a cluster classroom and you walk into the self-contained classroom, they look very similar and they feel very similar. The teachers are using the same instructional strategies for differentiation in both programs. The students are accessing the same curriculum. So fourth graders are accessing the fourth grade curriculum. Fifth graders are accessing the fifth grade curriculum. The biggest difference is that in the cluster model, the students are grouped in small clusters within a non-identified group of students. So they're exposed to, I guess, a more diverse group of students that are not identified as GATE. In a self-contained model, they are grouped with other students who have been identified as gifted and are in the gifted program. So that's the biggest difference between the two programs. In order to clarify this a little bit more, when we send out information about the GATE testing and the GATE programs, we'll also be sending out a little one sheet talking about what the different models look like, so that it's clear to parents what these two programs are. Any questions before I go on? Okay. And Jen is going to talk a little bit about what our cluster model looks like in middle school.
Thank you. So as you just heard, in elementary school, we have two options for our GATE-identified students. We have the self-contained and we have a cluster model. Once we move into the middle school, our students transition into a cluster-only model. And so all three of our middle schools, Sinaloa, San Jose, and Hamilton Middle, have the option to be a part of a GATE cluster. In middle school, we only GATE cluster, or we only cluster the students in English and history. That's a core class for the most part. If it's not core that year, then there's an English cluster and a history cluster in those two teachers' classrooms. As Michelle mentioned, a cluster is ideally in the neighborhood of 5 to 8 students. Could be a little lower, could be a little higher, but we try to stay in that range. The idea is that we want to have a group of students who are clustered together that are all GATE identified, but also within, again, a more diverse, balanced classroom. All of our teachers who have a cluster are GATE trained. They work with Karen Brown. Not only have they received training as a group, but they also have coaching that goes on with Ms. Brown, but also with our coaches. And while we have Megan here, she works mostly with our middle school teachers. We also have an elementary coach as well who supports our GATE cluster and self-contained teachers. In the middle school, I think one of the biggest questions that comes up is, why do we only cluster in English and history? And that is twofold. The first is that once we get to middle school and the students have a lot more options of courses, a lot of their schedule is designed around two things: their math placement and their elective choice. Math is not clustered because math is an individualized program for every student. When they enter 6th grade, it's quite a big transition from 5th grade program to middle school and high school math program. Because of that, all of our 6th graders start in a 6th grade CPM classroom. From there, there's multiple placements that will be made, not determined by their GATE identification, but determined by their math placement identification. So that is its own pathway. Their electives, again, we have many elective options: art, music, there's a number of them. And based on what the student wants to spend their time doing in middle school, that also is a big determiner for us of what their schedule looks like. Obviously, those classes are not based on their GATE clusters either, but based on their personal interests. Outside of that, that leaves us PE and science. Science, again, because of the type of curriculum that we're looking at and the high level of academic language, those classes are typically generally balanced like we would any other classroom on the campus. Last but not least, like I said, all of our teachers who have a cluster are, in fact, trained for differentiating for specifically our GATE clusters. All students are exposed to the same types of differentiation, because the truth is those strategies are great teaching strategies for all. But our cluster teachers do have specialized training because of the dynamics of their classroom. And that is ongoing from the time they start teaching a cluster until they aren't. So there will always be training ongoing for our GATE cluster teachers. And then just to reiterate one more time, as Michelle mentioned, again, kind of that, what is the difference between a cluster and a self-contained? And I really think the most important piece to take away is it really is the same differentiation strategies. It's the same curriculum. Every student who is identified as a gifted student is receiving the same services. It's a matter of what they feel most comfortable in as far as their learning environment. And that's what we provide to our elementary school students, is 2 options for the learning environment that they feel that they are most comfortable with as they transition into the upper grades. Okay. That's just what I said. Oh, look at that. Okay, it's time for open forum. So I know you had a chance to ask some questions already, but we would love to open it up for about 20 minutes. Actually, it's exactly 20 minutes we have. We could use a little bit less because we want to make sure that Karen has some time to talk about her experiences today in our classrooms. But if anybody has a question they would like to ask, now is the time. Yes, absolutely. If you could use the microphone, that would be fantastic, just so we can hear the question, because it is being live streamed. There's one.
So I was just thinking about my daughter in middle school, terrifying, but thinking more about how the cluster model, like what her experience will be like as a GATE identified student in a classroom with kids who aren't identified, and what that experience is like for them, because, you know, middle school, like, it's hard and you don't want to be different. And so that made me just a little bit nervous that she was going to be in a group and then be kind of singled out with a cluster of kids that are different.
I really appreciate you asking that question, because I think that that's a shared concern. One of our biggest goals, and I think what our teachers are trained to do, is to make sure that our students don't feel different in any way. Just because there is a cluster does not mean that that is the group they always work with. They will be differentiated for just like everyone else in the room. I find that in most of our cluster classrooms, unless the student has identified themselves or the student obviously knows that they are identified, other students would not notice or know that that student has been identified unless they've chosen to share that information. There certainly is not times when we're saying, hey, GATE kids, you're going over there, and not. Right. And so the idea is to differentiate in a way that is very comfortable and feels like it is being differentiated for every single student in the room, because that is in fact what's happening. So it feels very much like their classroom feeling has. There is absolutely a transition to middle school, so there will be a different feeling in that. What I have found in my experience with my own GATE identified students and clusters is it is not that is the transition. It is the moving from class to class and having multiple teachers. Right. That is the transition. The rest feels just like the rest of the part of the day. Yeah.
It's the cluster word is interesting then, because I've always assumed that the kids were clustered together. And so I don't know if other parents feel that way. I didn't realize that they were just part of the normal class.
There will be times when they will work together. It won't, like I said, be called out as it's the GATE cluster.
Right.
Okay. But I think, as you know, both families here that have students in the self-contained class or have versus that in the cluster, there is the same level of differentiation and ranges in both knowledge and skill within a self-contained classroom as there is within a non-self-contained classroom. Right. So the differentiation feels quite similar. Even within a GATE cluster classroom, there will be times when your GATE students are not necessarily in the high group or the low group or the mid group, and and the alternative is there will be times when they are. So they will be differentiated for, and they will be grouped in flexible groupings to ensure that they are always working with people who are going to hopefully increase their growth.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else you want to add? No, okay. Great. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Well, I'm really glad for that question because I think that's a very common question that we hear. Any other questions that we've heard recently that we feel like maybe want to? Oh, here's
So I understand that one of the reasons that we moved to the opting out model for the identification process is to try to increase the diversity and make sure that we are identifying every student that should be identified. And I just was curious to see what the result, I mean, we're still kind of early in the process, but I just was curious to see what results you've seen on that.
I'm going to let Michelle speak to that because we don't have the slide in here, but we actually do have quite a bit of data on and what those numbers are looking like.
So sorry I didn't have that slide prepared, but we actually saw an increase in testing. So we were actually able to cast a wider net and get more students from not just the underrepresented student groups of English learners, but we also got more students from special ed and other areas. So we really did see gains in that. So that's a little hooray there. And I'm hoping that that continues on. When I am purchasing license for the COGAT, and this is probably too much information, but we don't need to retest. So last year we identified a lot of students who were in 4th and 5th grade who did not get tested because they never turned in the opt-in form. So we were able to capture those 4th and 5th graders last year and get them tested so that we now don't have quite as much to get in this year's 4th and 5th grade because we were able to capture them. The nice thing is that we now have clusters at every single school site because of, I believe, that opting out rather than opting in change. So I think that this may be, and I'm not sure, the first time that we've had clusters at every single site. So, that's a little hooray, I think, for us. So, any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to turn the mic over to Karen, and she's going to be able to share a little bit more about what those differentiation strategies look like and what she saw out at the sites today when she was working with our students and teachers.
Good evening. I hate microphones, just want you to know that. They're an evil, evil thing. So today I spent most of my time talking with middle school teachers and working with middle school students, which was a lot of fun for me because I miss middle schoolers. I love that age. When we talk about, well, what is different in a cluster classroom? Nothing. The strategies that I'm asking teachers to teach are best practice. They should be found in every single classroom. Are they essential for the learning of a gifted child? Yes, they are. These children need rigor, but every child needs rigor. These children need best practice, but every child needs best practice. So when we think about, well, how do I get rigor? What do I do? Well, rigor doesn't come from a curriculum. It doesn't come from a book. It comes from what happens with that content, what the teacher does with the material. I can take a very challenging textbook and I can take the rigor right out of it by what I do with that content. So today, as I'm working in classrooms and I'm looking for examples of rigor. I'm looking for what is the teacher doing that would indicate to me that the rigor is there. I'm not looking for books. I'm not looking for, I'm watching and listening. So I'm looking for flexible grouping. That time when the teacher is working in small groups with students. Less time with what we call sage on the stage, where there's a teacher standing up in front of the room divvying out the instruction. More time where students are working collaboratively, where we're talking in small groups and a teacher is working with this small group and then this small group and then this small group. I want to see that because that's where rigor comes from, because the concept that every child in this room needs the same thing isn't true. Children don't all need the same thing. I'm looking for that ability to compact, that ability to understand that you already know this, so I'm not going to waste your time. Administrators cringe when I say things like, as a teacher, you are not required to teach the standards. And every administrator just goes, don't say that. You're not. As a teacher, you're required to ensure that your students master the standards. Well, if you already know the standard, why am I wasting your time? You don't need that instruction. I need to be putting you in instruction that you need, whether it's moving you forward, whether it's taking you deeper. Those are the things that I want to see in a classroom, that the teacher's compacting, that we are moving kids into the instruction that they need. Increasing the task complexity. There isn't a gifted child on the planet who wants to do more. No, not interested. I don't want to do more. I need to do different. I need you to increase the complexity of what I'm doing. Don't make it harder. Change the complexity of the task, because that's what will engage my brain. That's what will get me excited about learning. Increase the complexity for me. The reason we put these kids together, they need each other. It's very simple. Gifted kids need like-minded peers because I need somebody to talk to. I need somebody who gets excited about the same kind of things that I get excited about. That's why we group them together. We need to be able to show continuous progress. I deserve to grow just like every other child deserves to grow. And when we don't put them together, when we don't cluster them, when we don't provide them that teacher who understands how to differentiate for them, they don't make continuous growth. And they waste valuable time. And then, sadly, they need productive struggle. And when I say that, I have parents who, okay, but giftedness does not equal effortlessness. There is value to struggle. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know of a single individual on the planet who likes to struggle. We don't like that. There's a reason it's called our comfort zone. We like it. We like to be in our comfort zone. But you don't learn when you're in your comfort zone. You learn when you're struggling. And I hear things like, well, gate kids, they don't persevere. Well, if they're not persevering, that's our fault because we're not providing them opportunities where they have to persevere. I'm not going to persevere if I don't need to. I need to engage them in productive struggle. And I need, as a teacher, to be able to help them walk that fine line between destructive struggle and productive struggle. And teachers watch very carefully to figure out, okay, are you over the edge? Because I don't want you frustrated, but I do want you right at that edge where you're almost there, and then I'm going to pull you back. I want kids to struggle. I don't want it to come easily for them. And I have students who say, oh, Mrs. Brown, this is really hard. Yes, I know. Isn't that awesome? And they kind of look at me like, what is wrong with you? I just said this is really hard. I know. It's supposed to be. I'm making you think. I want you to think. I don't want you to be the child who always knows the answer. I want you to be the student who realizes that, oh, wait a minute, I don't know the answer. Yes, but do you know how to get there? Do you know the steps that it takes to move forward? Those are the steps of productive struggle. And the time to engage in productive struggle and to learn how to deal with it is when you're in elementary school and when you're in middle school not when you're in high school and college, because that's not the time to hit the wall. The time to fail, and I have people who say, but in education we say failure's not an option. In the real world, failure's an option. Yeah, it is. We fail at things. There isn't a person here who hasn't failed at something. Yet you're all here doing wonderfully, but you failed. I need students to understand that failure is an option. How you deal with failure, that's what determines whether you'll be successful. So I tell students, you are going to fail, but fail forward. Just fail forward and keep going. As long as you keep trying, you're fine. But we do need to provide rigorous challenges that allow our students the opportunity to find out what it feels like to not know the answer. And we have many GATE students, we have many very, very talented students who aren't getting that option often enough. And that's why we need to differentiate the curriculum and the instruction for them, so they get that opportunity to walk that line of productive struggle. So, today, we looked at things like the depth of knowledge, increasing that complexity for students. We looked at the continuum of complexity. How do I change just a small piece of what we're doing to change the rigor for this particular student? How do I compact this? We looked at things like Socratic questioning techniques. And then how do I embed the extension into what they're doing so that that question, that next question, comes naturally to the student who's ready for it? So I'm going to give you an example. This is something that I did in one of the middle school classrooms today. The poem is called Teddy Bear by Joe Wayman. And I asked the students to read the poem with me. We read the poem. And then my question to them was, what was the author's theme? What was he trying to get across to you? Students had a couple minutes to sit and think, and I asked them to write down what they believed the theme was without talking to anyone else. They read through the poem, students started taking notes, some of them circled some things, and then they wrote down their answer. And then I asked them to tell me, all right, what do you think the theme was? And hands went up all over the room. And they started giving me pieces. Well, I think it's compassion. I think it's security. I think it's, and we had probably 15 different themes on the board. And I had one young man say, Mrs. Brown, well, which one is it? I said, I don't know. Which one do you think it is? So then we broke into groups. And I said, all right, we categorized our themes, put them in categories. And I said, if you believe that this category is the theme, you're over here. If you believe it's this one, you're over here. And we broke into groups. And I said, now I need you to go into that text and support the theme that you've said you're seeing. Students were allowed to work together, or they could work independently. Gave them a few more minutes. They were looking for information. They were pulling it from their text. They were talking. The conversations were amazing. And then I stopped them, and I said, oh, one more question for you. What does the teddy bear symbolize? And you could see the wheels turning in their heads. Well, I had one student who said, it's the wistful longing for acceptance. I just kind of stood there and stared at him. Wow. I had one young man tell me that it's safety. The teddy bear symbolizes safety. Okay. I had one young lady say that it symbolizes unconditional love. Okay. And we had many answers for what that teddy bear symbolizes. There wasn't a right answer. The point was, do you understand what theme is? Can you pull from the text in support of your theme? Can you identify the elements of symbolism and what that element needs to look like? And then we finished with, Now, you've heard your classmates talking about varied themes, and they supported each one of them. Knowing what you chose as the theme, can you see someone else's? Can you see how someone else might have seen a theme other than the one you chose? And they began to have those conversations. That's the conversation that I want to happen in these classrooms. That's what I want. That's the Socratic questioning that we need. Now, I snapped pictures in classrooms today of examples of, okay, the fact that these are on your wall, let me know it's happening. You're using what we need to use. You're pushing children in this direction. You're asking them to step out of that comfort zone. So these are just some examples that I snapped in different classrooms. Then I went into another classroom. The students had been reading a book called Wonder, and I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but it is amazing, and there's actually a movie coming out shortly. The students have finished the book, and we began with a discussion of the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I explained to them that many adults confuse these two words. And so we talked about what's empathy, what's sympathy, and what's compassion. And then I asked them to look at the secondary characters in the novel that they had just read. And I asked them to look through the lens of the narrator of the story, which happens to be the main character. And I said, from his perspective, is this character sympathetic or empathetic? And they began to have conversations. And I had students saying, it depends. So what do you mean it depends? You either are or you aren't. He's like, well, no, it's not that easy. Because you see, at the beginning of the novel, I feel that he was demonstrating sympathy. I said, all right, can you tell me why? Well, because he felt badly that the student was being isolated. Okay. So you say that this character's sympathetic. Well, yes, but as the story progressed, when he became friends with the character, he also became isolated and other people wouldn't do things with him. And so now he can empathize with. I said, oh, so you can be both sympathetic and empathetic? Yeah, I guess you can. And then they had characters that they said, neither. I said, neither? This character is neither sympathetic nor demonstrates empathy? No, Mrs. Brown. This character's just downright mean. Why? What is it about us as individuals that allows us to show sympathy? What is it about us? What part of our humanity allows us to do those things? And they began to look at this particular character and realize that, wait a minute, he doesn't have any role models that demonstrate those things. So maybe that's why he doesn't. So the conversations were amazing. And they were able to identify character by character and have those conversations. That's in a cluster classroom. That's in a classroom where I have some students who it came very easily to and they were able to go very deep into the content. I have other students there who were able to take it to a certain level of depth. When we talk about depth of knowledge, they were at what we would consider a DOK 2, but they weren't able to apply it more deeply. But I had many students who were able to go at a DOK 3 and actually analyze and figure out why this was happening. All of that happens in the same classroom with the same assignment, but the assignment is designed to take students to different levels. Tomorrow, I will be working in the elementary schools, and this is a lesson that I have designed for them. They are looking at beginning discussions about explorers. And early exploration in one of the classrooms that I'm going to be in. And we're going to be looking at some critical reading skills. But what we're going to be doing is looking at the significance of the tools that these early explorers had as navigation tools. And we have 3 tools in particular that they're going to look at. But then the extension question that I'm going to be asking is, knowing the significance of what these tools allowed these men to do, what would the impact on exploration have been if they had had access to the technology we have today? Many of the explorers that we discover and discuss actually landed places by mistake. They didn't end up where they thought they were. And it wasn't until down the road that they realized, oh, wait a minute. So what would it do to exploration if they had that ability? And so we're going to take it to that next level for them. And we're going to start talking about those what ifs, which, by the way, are favorites for GATE students. They love that concept of what if? What if this could have happened? What would that do? Would history have been changed? Would we have the number of explorers that we have? What would have happened? So that's the time that I spent in the classrooms. I had a wonderful time. The students were amazing. The teachers were wonderful. We had some great conversations. I'm looking forward to tomorrow when I get to work with some 4th and 5th graders. But I want you to understand that one of the things that I do, particularly because I've been blessed to be able to come back to this district, I spend my time wandering around looking, because I want to know. It's one thing for me to offer a workshop and to say, okay, here are the strategies. That's great. But if those strategies don't go into the classroom and actually become part of the teaching practice, then it didn't do any good. And so I'm very excited when I can go into classrooms and see the depth of knowledge, when I can see content imperatives, when I can see depth and complexity icons, when I can see those things up on walls and student examples, because that lets me know that teachers are using those, that they're providing those opportunities. The other thing that I notice is that when I teach a lesson, it's real easy to tell whether kids have been exposed to this before. Because if they haven't been exposed to it before, they give you that deer in the headlights look of, I don't know what you're talking about, lady. I don't get that look from students. They fully understand, all right, we're going to move into groups. Okay, go. They know exactly what they need to do, which tells me that it's happening on a regular basis, or they wouldn't know what to do. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to work with these students. I love them. They're fun. They're exciting. And thank you for the opportunity to work with their teachers because they're doing some really great things. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a few extra minutes, so if there's any follow-up questions for either myself, Karen, or Jen, we're happy to answer any other questions you may have. All right, well, thank you so much for coming out this evening. It was a pleasure to share information about our GATE program with you. And we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully at the next GATE parent meeting. Thank you so much.